In the 19th century, somewhere along the Arctic coast, an Inuit hunting camp faced a choice that could decide who lived through the winter. Seal hunting demanded absolute coordination. One careless person could scare away prey, waste precious fuel, or put the entire hunting party in danger. According to accounts later recorded by explorer Knud Rasmussen, individuals who repeatedly endangered the group through chronic selfishness or violent behavior could eventually be driven away. In the Arctic, exile wasn't simply leaving home, it often meant facing the ice alone, with almost no chance of surviving. Anthropologists don't study this episode because it happened recently. They study it because small hunter-gatherer societies can preserve social patterns that help us understand how humans may have solved similar problems long before agriculture and written history. The details were never identical, but the challenge was universal. How do you keep a community alive when everyone's survival depends on everyone else? The answer isn't what Hollywood usually tells us. Ancient societies didn't all share the same rules, and there was no universal punishment for people who refused to contribute. Yet across different continents, researchers have found something remarkable. Many groups independently developed ways to discourage free riders, without relying on prisons, police, or formal governments. We'll follow the evidence step by step. And if you enjoy separating historical reality from popular myths, consider subscribing. It helps the channel produce stories built on archaeology, anthropology, and real scientific research. The first thing to understand is that these societies weren't fighting laziness. They were fighting uncertainty. Picture a hunting band of 30 people. Nobody knew when the next successful hunt would happen. Some days a hunter might return carrying hundreds of kilograms of meat. Other days, after hours of tracking animals, everyone came back empty-handed. Bad weather, injured prey escaping into the forest, changing migration routes, or simple bad luck could ruin an entire day's effort. That uncertainty shaped almost every social rule. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherers, including the Hadza of Tanzania, the Jew Hwansi of southern Africa, and the Ache of Paraguay, consistently found that food sharing wasn't an act of charity. It was insurance. A skilled hunter might feed dozens of people today. Next week, he might be the one relying on someone else's success. That's why healthy hunter-gatherer societies generally didn't punish people for failing to bring back food. Success was never fully under anyone's control. The real danger was different. Imagine one person who was perfectly capable of hunting, gathering, making tools, or helping with childcare, but chose not to. He still expected a share of every meal. He accepted everyone else's effort while contributing almost nothing himself. If several people behaved that way, the system would eventually collapse. Today, economists call this the free rider problem. But human beings encountered it tens of thousands of years before anyone invented economics. Here's the surprising part. The first response usually wasn't violence, it was reputation. In large modern cities, you can disappear into the crowd. You can argue with a neighbor, change jobs, or move across town without your entire social circle knowing. A hunter-gatherer band offered no such anonymity. Everyone knew who shared food. Everyone knew who avoided work. Everyone remembered who could be trusted when conditions became dangerous. Your reputation wasn't just your social image. It determined whether people wanted to hunt beside you, share food with your family, watch your children, or risk their own lives to help you during an accident. In a world without written records or money, trust became one of the most valuable resources a person could possess. And once trust started to disappear, something even more powerful than physical punishment began to take effect. Anthropologist Richard B. Lee witnessed this firsthand while studying the Juko Hwansi of the Kalahari Desert. He expected the best hunters to be admired like heroes. Instead, he found something that seemed completely backwards. When a hunter returned with a large animal, the rest of the camp often joked about it. That little thing? I've seen bigger. There's barely enough meat on it. Lee later described this tradition in his famous essay, Eating Christmas in the Kalahari. The goal wasn't to insult the hunter, it was to prevent success from turning into arrogance. At first, that sounds almost unfair. Why discourage the very person who had just fed everyone? Because today's successful hunter could become tomorrow's leader. And if one individual accumulated too much prestige, he might eventually expect larger food shares, greater authority, or the right to make decisions for everyone else. The teasing wasn't about the meat. It was about protecting equality before inequality had a chance to grow. Christopher Bain spent decades comparing dozens of hunter-gatherer societies across Africa, Australia, North America, and South America. Again and again, he found similar patterns. Communities often used gossip, ridicule, public criticism, and social disapproval to keep overly selfish or domineering individuals under control. He called this reverse dominance. In most animal societies, the strongest individual dominates everyone else. Many human hunter-gatherer societies evolved the opposite strategy. Instead of one powerful leader controlling the group collectively prevented anyone from becoming too powerful. Think about how unusual that is. Rather than rewarding dominance, these communities often treated excessive ambition as a warning sign. Social pressure became a survival tool. And unlike physical punishment, it carried almost no cost. Nobody needed guards. Nobody needed prisons. The entire community became the enforcement system. But reputation only works if someone still cares about what other people think. What happened when they didn't? Some individuals ignored every warning. They continued stealing. They repeatedly refused to cooperate. Or worse, they became violent toward other members of the band. When that happened, several societies had another option: not execution, exile. For modern people, being told to leave a community sounds unpleasant. For a hunter-gatherer living thousands of years ago, it could be catastrophic. A single adult might struggle to hunt large animals alone, defend against predators, care for young children, gather enough food year-round, produce every necessary tool, and recover from illness without help. Humans had survived for hundreds of thousands of years, not because individuals were exceptionally strong, but because groups were. That's why anthropologists describe hunter-gatherer life as deeply cooperative. Food wasn't the only thing people shared, knowledge was shared, childcare was shared, protection was shared, risk was shared. Remove someone from that network, and they lost far more than companionship. They lost access to an entire survival system. Ethnographic accounts from several societies, including some Inuit groups and Aboriginal Australian communities, describe expulsion as a punishment reserved for repeated, serious offenses that threaten the group. The exact rules varied enormously, and researchers caution against treating any single example as universal. But the underlying principle appears surprisingly consistent. If one person's behavior continually endangered everyone else, keeping that person inside the group could become even more dangerous than sending them away. That doesn't mean exile happened often. In fact, the evidence suggests the opposite. Most communities tried much smaller interventions first. Only after trust had completely broken down did exclusion become a possibility. Even then, there was one line that many societies were remarkably reluctant to cross, and understanding that line completely changes the popular image of how ancient tribes treated people who couldn't work. Here's the biggest misconception about ancient tribes. People often imagine that anyone who couldn't or wouldn't work was immediately abandoned or killed. The evidence tells a very different story. Across many hunter-gatherer societies, researchers found extensive food sharing with people who genuinely couldn't contribute. Children obviously depended on adults. Elderly people often remained valued members because they preserved knowledge about hunting grounds, edible plants, weather patterns, and tool-making. Injured hunters continued receiving support while they recovered. Pregnant women and new mothers were cared for because raising children was a collective investment in the group's future. The Hadza of Tanzania still provide one of the clearest examples. Meat from a successful hunt is widely distributed throughout the camp rather than kept by the hunter who killed the animal. Similar patterns have been documented among the Ake of Paraguay and in historical accounts of several Inuit communities. At first glance, that seems incredibly generous. In reality, it was practical. No hunter succeeds every week. No one stays healthy forever. Supporting people during periods of weakness increased the odds that others would do the same when your turn eventually came. Biologist Robert Trivers later described this principle as reciprocal altruism. Cooperating today because cooperation increases everyone's chances over the long run. Hunter-gatherers weren't calculating equations around the campfire, but their way of life reflected the same logic. That distinction changes everything. Ancient societies usually separated inability from unwillingness. Someone who couldn't hunt because of an injury wasn't treated the same as someone who repeatedly exploited everyone else's work while giving nothing back. Even then, anthropologists caution against simple conclusions. There was never a single prehistoric legal code. Some communities relied heavily on public shame. Others emphasized reconciliation. Some tolerated difficult personalities surprisingly well. Others responded more quickly to repeated threats. The farther back we go into prehistory, the less direct evidence survives, which is why researchers combine archaeology with ethnographic studies of historically documented hunter-gatherers. Those comparisons don't recreate the past perfectly, but they reveal recurring patterns that appear across cultures separated by thousands of kilometers. Now think back to that Inuit camp. The decision facing those hunters wasn't simply whether one person deserved punishment, it was whether the group's chances of surviving another winter outweighed the risk of keeping someone whose actions repeatedly endangered everyone else. That dilemma is far older than agriculture, far older than cities. It may be as old as humanity itself. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors survived because they learned to cooperate on a scale few other animals ever achieved. But cooperation has always come with a difficult question. How do you protect people who need help without rewarding those who consistently exploit everyone else's effort? Ancient tribes answered that question in different ways. Some relied on reputation, some relied on ridicule. Some, in extreme cases, resorted to exile. What they almost never did was treat every non-worker the same. Their rules weren't built around cruelty. They were built around preserving the fragile cooperation that made survival possible in the first place. And perhaps that's the most surprising lesson of all. The first human societies weren't simply deciding who deserved to stay. They were constantly trying to preserve the one resource more valuable than food, tools, or weapons: trust. If you enjoy exploring the real science behind humanity's past, subscribe and join us for the next story.